I don't think I'll have any trouble being heard. I've made myself heard in much larger rooms. Can you tell that I'm a teacher? I handed out papers, right at the beginning. There won't be a test, very big, at the end. So these are just for your reference. So I don't have a handy-dandy slideshow, as almost all the presenters do. That's partly a technical issue with me, but also I wanted to show you something a little different, which is basically what we've been doing with the kids and Parallax Robots there at the school. So Isaiah, can I have you make a couple of craters and whatnot for me here? I'm not sure where the beginning of this thing is. It's a bad sign when you're outsmarted by masking tape.
Just running a few tests, see if it can download, etc.
Okay. So to give you a little background, I am the principal teacher at a small private elementary school called Whittenberg Country School. We're located near Red Bluff, California, which is 2 hours north of Sacramento, about halfway between Sacramento and the Oregon border. And we've had this school for 7 years now. It's a K-8 private school. And a lot of what we do with the school is not really forward thinking and looking towards the future and high technology and things like that. In fact, a lot of it kind of looks back to the past. We call it an old-fashioned school for the 21st century. We're based on a 50-acre family ranch. The children have ponds that they can row a boat on. They climb trees and build tree forts, and they get to do a lot of, they run around barefoot, literally a lot of the time. The kids are running around barefoot. They can ride bikes at school. So they have all those sort of great, this is what kids always grew up with, back as far as any of us could remember, which today maybe is not so much the case in a lot of places. But we do try to also have some things that maybe you wouldn't have had in an old-time country school once upon a time. And one of those things that we've had an opportunity to do is to do some work with robotics, specifically with Parallax Robots. So there are a lot of great robotic programs out there. The first thing that I would say, my kids got to do, especially my oldest, this is my oldest Isaiah. So this is Isaiah Whitten. This is another child who's gone to the school, but not my kid, not one of my kids, although his mother also is a teacher at the school. This is Thomas Tenney over here. But the first robotic stuff that my kids got to play around with would be the Lego robots. And it's a really neat system. Our kids loved Legos, and so this was kind of a natural extension of that. But while there are a lot of good opportunities out there to use this robotic set or that robotic set, and I really can't compare and contrast the different advantages and disadvantages of each one, we got into using Parallax Robots, which are specifically geared for an educational environment, in part because what was kind of a surprise to me, one of our very first students, his dad, when I said, well, so what do you do after his kids signed up at the school? And he says, well, I have a company that makes computer chips and robots. And I'm thinking, I've lived in Red Bluff all my life. It's a pretty small town. I don't think we have that here. But his company is in Rockland, down near Sacramento. But he wanted his kids to more grow up in the country. So they moved north to Red Bluff. They bought 100 acres of walnuts. And so we ended up with one of our parents who had a robot company. And they build educational robots. And they make their own computer chips. And originally it was more on the chip side that they did. But over the years, the business has become more and more about the robots. So over the years, we've gone down there for field trips to see where the robots are made and things like that. But we've also started to do robotic field days at the school where we set aside the whole morning or the whole day, and the kids learn how to program the robots and are doing different tasks with them. This summer we had a number of summer programs, not only for our own students, but for kids throughout the community. And one of those programs was focused on space, particularly looking around the solar system. And one of the activities we had is we had a morning of programming Parallax Robots through a Mars simulation. So the paper is focused on that aspect. It's how would you use these Parallax Robots to run various kinds of Mars simulations. And so this is something that could be done at a school or in some other educational environment or a homeschool environment or just whomever would want to be doing it. So Parallax Robots come in all shapes and sizes, but the beginning kind of entry-level robot is what they call the Scribbler. So this is a Scribbler here. It's actually S3. It says there on the back, because it's the third generation of scribbler. And it's called a scribbler because it's got this pen port, this marker port here. So you take something like a Sharpie marker, stick it down through the pen port, and then once you've programmed your robot, it can be running around on the ground and drawing on your floor, or better yet, butcher paper, if you thought to put that down first. So it's a pretty handy little robot, and one of the greatest things about it is that it's ready to go right out of the box. So when you're working with kids, you know, if you have, don't do like an X for a starting point, and then give me like maybe 2 other X's for waypoints, and make sure it's not too straight of a line, so we have to move around some obstacles. But you know, when you're working with kids, sometimes you want to get right to the heart of the matter. You want them to be using the robots quickly. You don't want them to have a long process of building the robot first, and maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, and they get frustrated before they use it. So what I lay out in the paper is the way that we're doing it, which is 3 steps. And the first step is we're focusing on programming and using the robot. So you can take a scribbler. You can buy them online for about $170. Sometimes they have sales, and they're a little bit cheaper. Yeah, he won his at an auction, a silent auction. The company donated one to a school program that we have every year, and we have a silent auction, and he won the one from the auction. But you can pull it right out of the box, and very quickly the kids are programming, and they're running the robot through its paces and seeing what it can do. So the language that the scribbler uses and a lot of the other Parallax robots is something called Blockly. So you can see over on the side you've got various menus. And you can grab, and Thomas, feel free to just drag and drop and throw whatever you want up there. But you can put all these commands together. You can see on a lot of them you can adjust the command. It's like, okay, we can change forward to backward. We can change straight to left or right. We can change slow to quick or gentle or fast, or you've got all these different options. So the kids have a lot of different things that they can manipulate very, very quickly and see what it does. And having that pen in there actually is a really good way to introduce it to kids, because they think, okay, my robot's going to do this or whatever. I think it's going to draw a square, and you put that pen in there and it goes 90-degree turn, 90-degree turn, 90-degree turn, and you're like, oh, that's not a square. Didn't come back to where it started, and I've got this weird shape that's drawn on the paper. But for the Mars simulations, what we did instead to introduce the kids to the idea is that we made a little course on the ground. So we've got sort of a course here. Ours had a lot more to it. You can see some photos in the paper that show a little bit of the course on the floor of one of our classrooms there. And so you'd put the robot on the ground. You press the button, and it would run its course. But along the way, we've got obstacles. So the focus of the summer program was on the solar system. And so we said, okay, this is Mars, and kind of like the Mars rovers, you can't control it with a joystick because there's this time delay going on. So instead, you have to package together the commands. This is what the rover is going to do today, and I give it this dump of instructions, and then it runs through its paces. And it's got hazards to avoid. So we have some craters. We've got sand traps. Sometimes we have areas that are too steep. And we told the kids, it's like, you're going to start at the starting position, and you're going to go through the course. But if your robot touches any of those hazards, that trial run is over. And you come back to the beginning and you adjust your program and see how you can more successfully go through it.
Also, it usually doesn't get the degrees exactly straight, so that
Yes, there's some imperfection in the robot. And then, for an object to the mission, what you have is you have different X's along the way, different waypoints. So obviously this robot couldn't go, for those of you who are close enough to see, you couldn't go straight at this first X over here because we've got 2 craters in the way. So you'd have to do something like go around it in order to get over and pick up that first target. And so we say the target is as if the rover's looking for a point of interest. Maybe there's an interesting rock or something else that the rover wants to see there on the planet's surface. And the remarkable thing is, having done it with the school and having done it with random stray children from the community, having done it with ages from first grade all the way up through high school, they all pick it up like that. I mean, they've always just picked it up like that. And you don't start by having 42 commands and going all the way through the course. Instead, they kind of break it down to smaller pieces, and they're like, okay, we're going to try to get past this first obstacle. So we're going to say, go forward 12 inches, turn 45 degrees, go 6 inches, turn 45 degrees, go straight. And once they've successfully done that, they usually go, okay, we got to figure out what's the next step, and then the next, and then the next. And to run through the Mars simulation that we had this summer, they were doing something like 50 commands to the robot and picking up about 10 different waypoints along the way. And they had a whole lot more as far as craters and obstacles. Do like maybe one more crater button. That's probably good for now. But but all the groups were doing it. The younger groups that we had earlier in the morning, the older groups that we had in the afternoon, kids who had done it before, kids who had never done it before, they were all able to successfully get what they were supposed to do and be using it here. So there's a little more information in the paper, as one would sort of hope, but with the first step, the idea is just simply letting the kids figure out how to program and how to use the robot. Now, this is our lowest possible fidelity Mars simulation, right? It's two-dimensional. It's just, we're watching it and we say, oh, look, you rolled on a bit of tape. That mission is over. You got to come back and start again. And by the way, the kids were going through, 20, 30 iterations before they successfully made it through the course. And that's significant because it meant that they were unsuccessful 19 or 29 times. But they kept going, and they stayed engaged, and they stayed interested the whole time. They weren't like frustrated, like, oh man, my stupid robot didn't do the thing, so I'm done with it. They were like, no, let's go fix it. Let's go back. So besides talking about the values of what they're learning in terms of STEM, as far as programming and how to use robots and things like that, it's also just a good problem-based learning opportunity, which has applications in any field, in that you have some sort of problem. I'm not just filling out a worksheet. I'm not just doing this activity. But there's a problem to solve. And there isn't necessarily just one right solution. I mean, one group, they go around to the right at first and pick up these waypoints, and another group starts off going to the left and pick up these waypoints. Some groups said, let's start with the easier waypoints first and get those out of the way. Other groups are like, oh man, that one's hard. Let's take that out of the equation. If we can figure out how to get the hard one, then everything else is easier. So they had different ways of doing it, but in the real world, when you go to a job or even you're at college or something like that, a lot of life is problem-based learning, even if it's not packaged as such. Your teacher gives you a 10-page term paper. There are different ways of attacking that problem. You could start writing that day and lay out an outline, or you could start writing the night before it's due, and some methods of solving problems are better than others. There was also a nice element of collaboration because not having one laptop per child and one scribbler per child actually was a bit of an advantage. Good. Was a bit of an advantage because they'd be working together in teams. And so you'd have a couple kids, and sometimes they're all new, and sometimes one kid's more experienced and other kids are newer, but they'd be working together to solve the problem and talking about different approaches, different ways of attacking the problem. And it was a lot of good collaboration. And at times, people would sometimes butt heads and have disagreements, but it never got too bloody, and they all worked it out, and they all went through the course. So with the first step, focusing on programming and using the robots, you can get better than this. Obviously, this is the lowest possible fidelity, right? The two-dimensional tape on the floor. The next thing that I would do, and we didn't get to it yet this summer, but planning to do it, is you do something like you take a sheet of cardboard. So it's 4 by 8. It's a pretty good space to run something like this in. And then you go around with a jigsaw, and you I have no idea what he's programming behind me. He could be writing things about me for all I know. But you go with the jigsaw and you cut out some circles, right? So now instead of a referee saying, oh, you touched that crater, your mission is over, your scribbler is actually going to go doink into the crater, and you've got a problem now. So that's it's a little more realistic. And you take that cutout circle and you put it over here. And now that's an obstacle. It's a rock. So you go donk into the rock. Your scribbler's not going to keep going past it anymore. And so now you've got this, this 4 by 8 simulated terrain, and you can even move things around. You can, unscrew the rock from there and put it there. Okay, this was too easy for the kids. They've already figured out how to use it. We're going to drill a couple more craters. We're going to throw up more rocks. We're going to change the positions of the rocks. But that's all in the first step, where the focus is on programming and using the robots. The second step, for what I envision, is to take some of the more complicated robots that Parallax has, like the Bobot or the Activity Bot, and with these ones you get a kit. And we actually have 2 of the kits at the school, but we haven't built them yet. So you have these kits, and the kids are actually assembling the robots. They're putting the robots together, and because Parallax has all sorts of different widgets that you can add to your Bobot or your Activity Bot, you're not just building a single type of robot, but you can change it, you can adapt it, you can put tank treads on there, you can put gripper arms. These are all things that Parallax has already. You can add different sensors to it, all sorts of things. You've got all these different pieces, but now the kids are physically building the hardware. But I think that's the second step. 1 minute? Okay.
No, one little thing. In addition to all that you said, you can also put an Android phone on it, and you can do basic machine vision if you want to.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I talk about in the paper, that would be the goal eventually, is that you would have remote uploading instead of taking the robot back each time and plugging it into your computer to change the program. Yeah, that you could.
Download it.
Yeah, you can do it remotely, and you put cameras on it and things like this. And even the Scribbler is set up. It has a hacker port, so you can add peripherals to it. It's got a number of features, some that they don't even really list. 5 minutes, thank you. It's got a number of features. There's a microphone on here. They don't tell you about that online. It's kind of a little Easter egg you have to find, and then you go, oh, I can control this thing by sound. But the second step, and again, read the paper for more detail, but the second step is the kids will be building hardware. But they've already experienced, I know what a robot can do, now I'm building a better physical robot to do this sort of stuff. And then finally, the third step, and it's sort of the final step, except you can keep going up and making it better and better by degrees. The third step is to make a better simulated terrain, a better analog Mars, where it's like, okay, instead of just a clean piece of plywood, we have, actual, there's dirt and dust and sand and rocks and things like that, and now we've got to protect our robot against those sort of things, and the traction may be variable, and and on and on. But you could eventually have, without a whole lot of money, and with starting, I am not a very technical guy, which is why you all have papers instead of a slideshow. But it's just very accessible to start with the Parallax Robots, start with the Scribbler, work your way up, and make a better and better Mars simulation. It's something that a school or other group could do. And then if a group did it really well, as this gentleman was pointing out, you put a camera on there, you have some remote, not remote control, because you don't want to be just driving it around the train, but you want to be doing remote programming, where you can upload the new program without having to bring it back and plug it in. Well, now you've got this, more high-fidelity rover in a more high-fidelity simulated environment. Your school uses it, and then somebody else could even log in and use it remotely. So those are some of the ideas that we have for this. In that paper, I do want to point out that 2 of the children who are pictured are Isaiah and Thomas from the summer as they were doing those sort of things. I was hoping we'd have a little more opportunity to run something, but Thomas, why don't you throw whatever program you have in there and then just, set the robot down and let it run through its paces. But I think we must be getting very close to the end of about 3 minutes. Until question time. Okay. I can certainly talk more. That's not a problem. But for our school, going all the way back to the beginning, talking about the school, our school does a lot more with books and paper and pencil than we do with computers. And the world's kind of changed a little bit from when I was a kid, in that when I was a kid, having a computer lab at school was really significant because most kids didn't have computers at home. We had some computers at home. We had a Commodore 64, and then we worked our way up, 286, 386, 486, those of you old enough to remember those numbers, and so we had that at home, but a lot of kids didn't. And now it's almost like the world's flipped on its head in that almost every kid has computers at home and has access to that at home, and they've got plenty of screens, and so it's like at our school we tend to focus on, hey, let's put the real world in front of you. We do a lot of field days, field trips, a lot with books, papers, and pencils. But at the same time, I realize the importance of they also need to get their hands onto some computers and get into some programming and check out some things with robots, because having well-rounded kids means that they can build a tree fort and build a robot, and our school is looking to do both of those things. So thank you very much for coming, and I would be happy to take questions if you had any.
So I'm just curious, you did Lego robots? Or
We did Lego robots with our family, but not with the school. So this is the first thing we really did with the school.
between the Legos or this, because I have EV3s at my school in Vex, but for the higher level
Yeah.
middle school kids, but I need something like this for kids who just.
I would say by far, from what and my experience is very limited, but having done some with the Lego robot, I've heard of Vex, I haven't really used it, but by far, this is the easiest thing I've ever seen as far as getting young, new kids.
Who have no experience.
Yeah, like in 10 minutes, they can be putting together a simple program that says drive forward for a foot, turn 90 degrees to the right, go to the right for a foot, and the kids physically see that and they go, wow, I just programmed a robot. It is slicker and,
That's my opinion, kids who've been
yeah.
working with robots and know what they're doing.
And there's lots of options for those kids, but what do you do with a first or second grader? What do you do with a fifth grader who's never seen anything like a robot before? Exactly. You know, a kid who's just never done anything with it before. So this is really easy entry. I mean,
And then if you're hardcore, you can
So.
also access the system itself.
yeah, and
Can you show us that? Can you show us the text view for that?
Thomas, can you show them how to see the code itself behind the Blockly? So,
There you go.
any other?
How many do you have in your school for the program?
Actually, what we do mostly for the school are, first of all, when I say little country school, I mean little country school, we're like 30 kids. We have 3 classrooms, 30 kids. I teach 5th through 8th grade. Thomas's mother teaches 1st through 4th grade, and my wife teaches the kindergarten. So we are 3 very small classes, and it's a little like one-room schoolhouse. Well, I mean we've got separate rooms or separate classrooms, but it's a very small little country school. But what we do is a bunch of our kids have robots, so we bring them in, and usually the kids are in about groups of 3. So if we have, one of the classes, 15 kids, we'll have five or 6 robots in there for them. But having a group of, I think 3 is a really good sized group. More than that, you can't all put your opinion in. But if it were a robot for every kid, then they wouldn't have the collaboration part, and it'd be harder for some kids to solve that particular problem. But when they put a couple brains together, they're better at that.
Do you think we can be programming with the iPad?
Yeah, it can be programmed out of PCs and Macs, and
You need an adapter for that to plug into the iPad.
It doesn't work on tablets or phones.
Well, actually.
oh, it isn't supported
It
that?
works on Android tablets. I know because I wrote the driver for it.
Okay.
For Parallax. So iPads, no. Android tablets, yes.
Okay,
Which is good because they're cheaper anyway. So.
but they are. Yeah. But I know that they're also working on adding other platforms. So hopefully, if they don't have iPad now, that they would have it. They would have it soon. So.
Run the course. He is trying to get it.
How long is the workshop? If you were like, can you do it in an hour?
You could do something in an hour. I think you'd be better off to do 2 hours. I think that's how we did it when we did the first robotic field day. Is we had like one group of kids come in for like 2 hours, and the next group come in for 2 hours. And it's like, I would say in the first hour they're getting their feet wet, they're making it run some things, and in the second hour they're then feeling like I know what I'm doing, and they're adding in more and more things. So they start off drawing really simple things like squares, and then they get to things where they're like, they can be writing letters, they can be doing all sorts of things. So I think 2 hours would be a good first chunk of time for an activity like this.
And the second question is, okay, so now you're geared towards the kids.
Yes.
How about the end of the scale? Like, so we're taking our programs in for executives.
Yeah.
So, the adults.
Yeah, no, I
would
think,
this be suitable?
and
Would they do that too?
with our school, because like I've described it as that old-fashioned school for the 21st century, a lot of the stuff that we've done, we've had adults come and say, oh, that's really cool. You guys are using a pottery wheel. You're doing this, you're doing that. And so we've actually started taking a number of the programs, not this yet, but we could, the programs that we do with kids, and we sometimes do programs for adults. Maybe it's on a Saturday or maybe it's on an evening because people like to learn at kind of whichever age they are. And so I think you definitely could take this because there are plenty of adults like me where it's like, look, I've done next to no coding or programming in my life. I let my brother have that side of the world. But even I can use this, which means, you could get most any old dog to do this trick. So,
How much does it cost for the whole, like, the beginner's course?
the beginner thing that you would need is just the robot, and it'd be $170.
But what about the software?
The software is free.
Just download it?
Yeah, Blockly is now, and that is something I want to point out, that the software is web-based, and so you have to be able to connect to the web, which sometimes offers problems when you have a little remote country school out in the sticks and you've got a little satellite uplink that sometimes doesn't like it when it rains, but for the most part it works. Oh, hello. Sorry, you've been very patient. I did notice you earlier, and then I got distracted by shiny lights. Question? Well, I wouldn't take these out into a more difficult environment where you've got sand and dust and things like that. But in the paper, it talks about kind of there's a step 1, step 2, step 3. So as kids get better at like building the more complex kits, the Bobots, activity bots, and things like that, that would be kind of the third step to add in is like, okay, now how are you going to protect your electronics? How are you going to protect your motors and your gears and all your widgets from the dust or the heat or the cold or whatever it is? And so I think that's the logical direction to go in, because obviously that would be then getting to be more like Mars. And I think that would be the right idea, is that's where you would eventually want to get to. This is, you live in the desert? Yeah. But so this might be something where you start with a scribbler in your house, you learn how to program it, and then you add other systems, other robots, tell your folks, well, I got a birthday coming up, and you get the next better robot, and then you go to those sort of things. So I am out of time. Thank you very much. And technology doesn't like to play when it has an audience. Yeah, whatever we have, anything here is. By the way, they did design it so that you can set it on its side. These little things on the side are just a little further out than the wheel, so it can actually run through its entire little program sitting there on the table without it running away and off your table. I was worried about the Thriller robot was going to thriller himself right off the table, but he seemed to do okay. Okay, so he's going to set it down, push the button, and it'll run through this program that you're seeing up there on the board. So see if you can interpret these movements with what it's doing there. So it just turned to the right, it turned again, it came back. So he's just drawn a little square.
And it's going to do
And he's in a loop pattern, so he's going to do that forever. And actually, there's a little bit of imperfection in the program. So if you make it do a square and then tell it to repeat ad nauseum, it's going to be like 2 degrees off every time, and it starts making some really interesting looking patterns as these squares get 2 degrees off every time, and you get these rosette designs and different things like that. So thank you very much. If anyone wants a copy of the paper who didn't get one, it's right up here, and I appreciate you all being here. So.
Let's see.